supposedly fought the Klan funded the Klan. The charity that supposedly fought neo-Nazis funded neo-Nazis. The Southern Poverty Law Center ran a methodical, calculated scheme to defraud their donor base of $3 million and lied to them and used an illicit banking structure system to create shell companies to hide their money and who it was being sent to, specifically for the reason to sow discord and hate into our society. This is the ultimate definition of hypocrisy. And if you look at the indictment produced by the Department of Justice and the FBI, you will see that these banking institutions tie directly the funding mechanisms in which the Southern Poverty Law Center used to fund at least 8 hate groups they supposedly wanted to take out, but they were paying the very villains of our society they supposedly wanted to protect us from.
That's the FBI Director, Kash Patel, on the topic of the Southern Poverty Law Center being the firefighter and the arsonist. Can you imagine? Let's get to our guest. Excited to talk to Hans von Spakovsky, Advancing American Freedom Senior Legal Fellow, former FEC Commissioner, and former DOJ lawyer, about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Hans, when I hear Southern Poverty Law Center, I just on the surface think these should be some pretty good guys.
Yeah, and they're not. They've been a very biased partisan organization for a long time. You know, they started off as actually a good organization to go after, for example, the Ku Klux Klan. But that totally changed, frankly, more than 2 decades ago. And, you know, according to them, if, for example, you believe that our immigration laws should be enforced and the people who are here illegally should be removed, you know that makes you a hate monger according to their standards. And look, this is a very serious indictment. Almost a dozen charges include wire fraud, money laundering, false statements to a federally insured bank, and you know the whole idea here was that they transferred. We're not talking about a little bit of money, Annie. $3 million. That they raised from their donors, telling their donors, oh, we're doing this to stop these kind of violent extremist hate groups. And then they funneled that $3 million to those organizations, to the leaders and organizers of those organizations, everything from the Ku Klux Klan to Aryan Nations. And they set up, if you can believe it, fictitious bank accounts. That's where the money would go from the donors. Then they would launder it through them. That's why they've been charged with money laundering, lying to federally insured banks. And, you know, the one thing I haven't really heard anybody say is that, you know, the Justice Department is seeking. They're seeking civil forfeiture. That means that if they win this case, the organizations are going to have to pay that $3 million back. They're going to collect it, and that's going to financially really hurt this organization, which I hope it does.
Yeah, I mean, the consequence of the illegality, the money laundering, the deceit that took place with how they're taking the monies in and the efforts, the lengths they went to try to cover that money up before it went to Aryan groups and KKK affiliations. You know, I'm really also thinking a lot about the other consequences that have stemmed from their actions. There's a Fox News post written here by Charles Kreitz. It says SPLC faces blowback from hate map targets after DOJ fraud indictment. Hans, I think it's really important to include in this conversation here the way that the Southern Poverty Law Center targeted Turning Point USA as a hate group, and Charlie Kirk lost his life because of a nutcase who decided that they were going to do something for the world and take that man out by assassinating him. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center's responsibility here might be just bigger than the dollars and cents of it.
Oh, no, there's no question of that. There have been not just Charlie Kirk, but there have been other reported incidents of people using these false information that they provided about other nonprofit organizations to then engage in violence against those organizations and the individuals who work there. No, they have a lot of responsibility for a lot of things, including, by the way, apparently part of the indictment was that they helped pay for and organize the Charlottesville protests that also ended up in violence. And look, I got to tell you, I think actually they had a pure profit motive from this. Why? Because how have they raised so much money over the years? By convincing donors that there are growing all these hate groups, that's growing in America, and therefore they need somebody to help stop it. Well, the actual truth of this is it's been on the decline. Racial hatred, things like that, was going down for a long time. And when that happens, they can't raise money. So what do? They secretly finance those kind of groups so that they can then say, oh, see what we told you? You need to give us money.
Speaking with Hans von Spakovsky, what do we know the details about? They sent checks, millions of dollars to these entities that they were supposed to be fighting against. What do we know what the outcomes were? The money, what it was specifically requesting, what they were paying them to do, or what they were paying them for?
Well, they are claiming these were confidential informants, but according to the Justice Department, and according to this isn't just the Justice Department, this is according to the grand jury indictment. This money wasn't just going to people who were somehow telling them what these organizations are doing. These were going to the leaders and organizers of these organizations. So in essence, they were funding them to engage in violence and potential violations of state and federal laws in the kind of activities they were involved in. You don't pay $3 million to informants, particularly because what did they do with that information? They've been trying to compare themselves to, the FBI does that. When the FBI pays informants, they do it to get information that they then use to criminally prosecute. And that is not what this organization did.
Do you see, these are criminal charges. This is an indictment from a grand jury on criminal charges. Is there a flood of civil cases that are going to be coming Southern Poverty Law Center's way?
Oh, I would think so. If I was a donor who had given a lot of money to them, I would be filing a civil lawsuit accusing them of fraud and wanting to get my money back.
Hans, this is Ryan. I see a lot of Democrats coming out in support of Southern Poverty Law Center and saying, well, they were actually trying to get information. They were trying to infiltrate these hate groups, and that's why they were paying informants. Is there any way, have they shown that they actually got any information from these people? Because I haven't seen that at all.
No, they haven't. That's what I was just talking about. They didn't do anything with any information that they got from them. Like I said, this is not the FBI. This is not the FBI then criminally prosecuting. They simply used the violence that they were helping to finance to raise more money for their own organization.
Yeah, it's not investigative journalism by any stretch of the imagination. We're speaking with Hans von Spakovsky. I did want to ask you before we let you go about the news that's coming out. We had Molly Hemingway on the show a little bit earlier this week to talk about her book about Alito, but she's uncovered a lot of what is taking place at the Supreme Court behind the scenes. And what I always used to assume was just the one place where everybody kind of decided to rise above all the noise and the muck of Washington, D.C. and politics. It looks as though the Supreme Court isn't operating in such a fashion. Do you think that this iteration of the Supreme Court is acting outside of the boundaries of what is necessary for 9 justices to be able to represent the Constitution, apply it to the laws of the land, and act in a way that is respectable?
Yes, and the people responsible for that are Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and our newest Justice Jackson Brown. And look, you don't have to go that far back. You go back to Justice Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. 2 justices at the opposite end of the legal and political scale. They were good friends. And you know what Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said about that when she was asked about it? She said, look, we attack each other's ideas. We don't attack each other personally. And you can see just in the last few weeks how these newest three justices have been attacking their colleagues personally. I mean, Sonia Sotomayor attacked Brett Kavanaugh. You've had the same kind of attack from the newest justice. And frankly, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. That is not the way they should be acting, and it breaks the long traditions of the court.
Hans, we're hearing a lot about, there's a term that's being discussed a lot in this story about a shadow docket. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what that shadow docket is and why it's part of this story right now.
Look, they call it that, but it's not that. It's called the emergency docket. And it simply means that when, for example, a federal district court, normally a case is litigated there, then it goes to the courts of appeal, there goes to the Supreme Court. But what's been happening with the Trump administration is that all these, frankly, rogue federal judges have been issuing injunctions to prevent the administration from doing things like deporting dangerous criminal illegal aliens. And so what the Trump administration has been doing is they've been filing what are called emergency appeals. That's what this supposed shadow docket is. They're filing emergency appeals with the Supreme Court saying, look, would you please stay or suspend this injunction while the court is, while the trial court is going through the trial stage. And in many instances, the court has been doing that, suspending these stays. Why? Because the judges who are issuing these injunctions have no basis under the law to do that. That's what's angering folks like Sonia Sotomayor and Justice Brown Jackson, because they don't like the fact that these lower court injunctions are being thrown out. There's nothing wrong with that. It's legally what the court ought to be doing.
Last question before we let you go here. Do you think that the behavior of these 2 or 3 liberal justices will affect the way the other 5, 6 justices go about their business, include the full 9 in, all of the discussions that take place? Will it affect the outcome on rulings from the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think it potentially could, because, one of the things that the justices often do is they try to reach consensus.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard to want to reach consensus with somebody who is out in public personally attacking you.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, Hans von Spakovsky, you're always a welcomed guest on this show. We thank you for the time once again today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye. Advancing American Freedom Senior Legal Fellow, former FEC Commissioner, and former DOJ lawyer. Lots more that I could talk to him about, especially those maps and the unconstitutional ruling that came from a judge. If you ask the Attorney General from Virginia, isn't he the one who said that he wanted to put bullets in the head of his opponents in the campaign?
That's the one.
Oh, yeah. Well, he has said that this activist judge is crazy. But there is a judge in Virginia who said, no, we're not doing these maps. So it will go through the process. You didn't hear that?
No, it seems like you're questioning his judgment.
I am. I don't even know if questioning is strong enough of a word. I am ridiculing and calling out the ridiculousness of Virginia voters, 1. And 2, okay, fine. I'm questioning his judgment. The Fox News report says Republicans are cheering a circuit court victory in Virginia that showed Democrats' redistricting efforts in Virginia are not quite over yet, despite a referendum to accept a new map drawn by Democrats getting approved by voters Tuesday. Virginia Circuit Court Judge Jack Hurley ruled Wednesday, one day after the Democrat redistricting referendum passed, that all votes for or against the proposed redistricting amendment were unconstitutional, citing rules that impose certain requirements that the referendum did not meet. You go on to, I'm going to get the Attorney General's comment here. Shortly after the ruling came down, Virginia Attorney General Jay Jones, fantastical murderer, if you will. That's probably the nicest way you could say that. A Democrat who beat GOP incumbent Mayares in November indicated his office will, quote, immediately file an appeal. Sounds like a threat.
Yeah, it does.
I would take this man seriously.
I would too.
More seriously than the voters in Virginia. That Fox News report by Alec Schemmel. Let's take a break. The YouTube poll, we're asking you about what if the NFL came back to St. Louis? How would you feel about it? YouTube.com/@AnnieFrey. And our very favorite, taking your texts off the Annie Frey Show text line, 314-241-9797. Would you welcome the NFL back to St. Louis? I'll add this. This isn't part of the poll question, but what if they begged? Forget about if they will. I'm just saying, what if they begged? We'll be right back.